and welcome to this edition of Berkshire Matters. I'm Bob Dean, and I'm your host for today's show. Our guest today is State Representative Paul Mark, who represents the 2nd District. Welcome, Paul.
Hey, how are you doing? Good to see you.
I'm doing great. You're always the first guest of our new cycle each year, so it's good to have you. And the last time we were talking, of course, it was all of the the impact of COVID and things like that. So hopefully we don't have to talk about that too much, but I do want to ask you about the budget. I do want to ask you about the U.S. 2020 census and redistricting. But before we get that, could you just tell people joining us who may not know what your current district is? Could you just tell us a little bit about your district, please?
Yeah, my old district was the 2nd Berkshire District, and the district up till just now when redistricting happened, the district consisted of part of the city of Pittsfield, Dalton, Hinsdale, Peru, Savoy, and Windsor in the Berkshires, and then 10 communities in Franklin County, including Greenfield, going all the way to the New Hampshire border, the town of Northfield. And so for the past 10 years, it was 16 cities and towns in 2 counties. I think the 2nd biggest district in the state geographically.
So you've done a lot of traveling across a very rural area, and not only do you know Berkshire County, but you know those other counties and those other needs and issues as well. So you've got a pretty wide knowledge of what matters to us out here in Western Mass, I guess I would say, if that's fair.
Yeah, I think that's a very nice thing to say. Thank you. And
welcome.
But yeah, in practice, it actually is very appropriate. And when I first ran, my district was 22 communities. It was Berkshire, Franklin, and Hampshire counties. And then the last time there was redistricting, it changed to just Berkshire and Franklin. And now, after the 2020 census, a lot is changing for our entire delegation. If you like me to talk a little bit about that.
Yes, please.
Okay, great. We undertook the census in 2020, obviously under the U.S. Constitution. It happens every 10 years since 1790. And as a result of the census, it helps determine both funding levels for the cities and towns in Massachusetts and throughout the country, but also how we allocate our voice in Boston and in Washington. And so in Berkshire County, we did a lot of work to try to get out the vote. We did the same in all of Western Massachusetts. And I was chair of the redistricting committee while the census was happening. And we had, I think, over 40 events throughout the state. And then COVID hit. And so everything got delayed with the timeline. And we had to move to the virtual format for outreach. But nonetheless, Massachusetts did a really good job. And we beat expectations by far, coming in over 7 million people for the first time, I believe, in our history as a state, which is great. And so because of that, not losing a member of Congress, anything like that. Yeah.
So when you say, Paul, get out the vote, that means just making sure people respond to the census?
Yeah, exactly. Make sure people filled out their census, filled it out in one place, fill it out for the proper place where they reside, that kind of thing. And so in Berkshire County, we expected there would be a decline of 4%. But again, we did a really good job, and it was actually closer to 2%. So we beat all expectations, but unfortunately, the state grew at a pace of about 5%. So we didn't keep pace with that. And then Boston specifically grew over 10%. And so as a result, for the past 10 years, we've had 4 representatives, and myself and Smitty Pignatelli, our districts have been hybrids. My district's half has as many people in Franklin County as it had in Berkshire, and his had people in Hampshire and Hamden. And like you're saying before that, even I had Hampshire and Frank Forward. The population of Berkshire County is only enough to happen is the 3 districts that remain, the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd Berkshire, are going to be entirely and exclusively within Berkshire County. So no longer hybrids. They're going to be 3 focused representatives paying attention to Berkshire County first and foremost. And then on the Senate side, at the same time, people started to hear that Adam Hines was thinking about running for lieutenant governor. And when these things leak into legislative bodies, the Committee on Redistricting on the Senate side heard that and proposed a map that would have actually eliminated our Senate district, that would have split northern Berkshires and put it in with Northampton and Amherst, and put southern Berkshires in with Westfield and Agawam, that area. And when we heard about that in the Berkshire delegation, and as Western Massachusetts legislative delegation, including the senators, everyone was infuriated, and we all spoke up. We all made a big deal about it. And it kind of culminated in me making the decision that I would run for the Senate seat to try to guarantee that we wouldn't lose that district entirely. And so here we are with 3 focused representative districts. Same in Franklin and Hampshire counties. You're going to have districts that are entirely within those districts, and then a Senate district that has grown to 57 communities.
Wow.
So all of yeah, exactly, all of Berkshire County, 11 towns in Franklin, 9 in Hampshire, and 5 in Hampden. So bigger than the state of Rhode Island. A lot of geographic area to cover, a lot of driving.
So if things go as hoped, you're going to be doing a ton of driving, but Berkshire County is going to stay within one Senate district, which to me sounds incredibly significant and important. Tell us why that's so important.
Yeah, it's really important because as a county of 129,000 people, Senate districts are around 170,000 people. We are the majority of a Senate district. And so that's important because especially going from 4 representatives to 3, so 5 legislators total down to 4 legislators total, while the senator from Northampton and the senator from Westfield are both great people and I think would work hard, it's just not the same as having someone that lives, within Berkshire County and really understands. And having represented both sides of the mountains, the Berkshires and the Valley for 10 years now, it is a lot of work to be accessible in every one of the communities you represent. And so I think it's a big win to make sure we're keeping that voice. And also it's a big win to keep the voice in Congress. That 10 years ago when we lost a member of Congress, of course, was John Olver in Western Mass. It was the one that was eliminated.
Yeah. And we're probably still feeling the pain from that as good and as well as our current congressman represents us. He's not as Western Mass, well, Berkshire County focused, I would say. So this could have been incredibly painful for us if we not only lost the state representative seat, but also had the Senate seat put into 2 separate districts. So I guess in a way, this is a best case scenario.
I think so. It's an opportunity again, while we're moving from 5 total legislators to 4, I think the 4 are going to be really focused on what's important. And we've always had to speak with a bigger voice than we're entitled to, because when you're 5 out of 200, it's always an uphill battle. But I think we all work together well, we collaborate well. And so, I feel good under the circumstances. And I think we all as a county have a lot of work to do over the next 10 years, because we do have to try to do everything possible to stem some of that population decline. And I think as it is, if the census was happening in 2022, I think we'd already be in a better position than we were heading into early 2020.
How so?
Well, I think things have changed just because of the pandemic. I think there's been an interest in and an ability to work remotely. I think there's a renewed interest in maybe family life and kind of picking where you live based on where you want to live versus a job. And again, remote work enables that. I remember, I think they say, like, even when I was in high school, you kind of picked where you live based on where you find a job. And they're saying the younger generation is the opposite. They find where they want to live and then they try to find a job there. And as the broadband project is coming to a successful close, it's been a very long time, but even you can get the internet. So it enables more communities in our region to be able to be an attractive place for people to relocate. And I think focusing on that, focusing on housing, focusing on economic development, focusing on protecting our environment, all of these things are going to be enabled to us to, I think we're poised to grow and have a really lot of opportunity over the next 10 years.
And I mean, you just the fact that we're doing this show remotely, that, Jeff at Pittsfield Community TV is helping to coordinate this, but you and I are in separate locations, I guess speaks to your point that there are some opportunities that have arisen as a result of all of the pain of COVID-19 and people having to stay away from each other. So tell us the broadband initiative. Just give us a brief, if you could, just talk about that very briefly, if you could.
Yeah, if you live in Pittsfield, you might not remember this, but for people that are in the hills, a lot of the communities didn't have access to internet service, and that was because the incumbent carriers never felt it was profitable enough to run high-speed internet. And we're used to that in the hills. We were the last people to get running water. We're the last people to get electricity. This is kind of how things work, unfortunately. We're such a small town. And so over the past 11 years, there has been significant investment from both the federal government and the state government and town governments and the people in the towns to try to make sure that every person in Western Massachusetts has access to high-speed broadband internet. And so in Peru, in the last 6 months, I believe, there has been access to Charter. And just in the last month, I believe me and Representative Barrett were able to finally get the final houses in Peru the funding they need to get the rest of them wired. And so
Awesome.
almost every town is there now. And
Okay. Now you may not be aware of this, Paul, but from time to time, as you've been talking, and it just happened just now, you freeze up and we don't hear your audio so well. So I guess we should let our viewers know we're not doing this on purpose. But without the broadband initiative, we wouldn't be able to hear or see you at all based on where you are. Is that fair to say?
Exactly. And
okay.
When I've done shows on PCTV, I generally do in the car from my phone. And I know they put a photo of me, but like nobody ever sees me interacting. So maybe I've never heard any complaints, but it's nice to be able.
And of course, you're parked when you do those shows. Let's make sure everyone knows that.
Indeed,
you're safely parked.
Yes.
So let's talk about, if we can, the budget, where we are in the process, and also what your priorities are, if we could.
Yeah. So where we are right now, in late January, the governor filed the fiscal year 2023 budget. And every year the governor puts out a budget, and we're on the normal timeline again. There was, when COVID hit, it hit obviously in March of 2020. It delayed the state budget from the normal timeline. And now we've been working our way back to a normal timeline. So the fiscal year ends and begins in July. So right now we're going through what the governor proposed. We both as legislators look at the budget, and we hear input from both advocacy groups and community members, and people let us know, where did the governor get it right, and where is he off? Where does funding need to change? We're also in a surprisingly good position in that we've been getting money from Washington, both the ARPA money, which was a stimulus bill in Washington. We've been running ahead of revenue expectations, which is also good, and we're expecting money to come in from that infrastructure bill. So pre-pandemic, I believe we had about $4 billion in our rainy day fund. There was time in early 2020, in April 2020 specifically, that we bonded to make sure that we could meet payroll, because there was a fear that the state might not have enough cash to pay the people that work there. And so to go from really good position to really scary position to now emerging from the pandemic with over $6.5 billion is amazing. And so we head into the budget season, and in April, the House takes up the budget. In May, the Senate takes up the budget. So this is the time for people to let us know if they have concerns. Okay.
And what are you hearing? What are some of the concerns you've heard so far?
People talking about road money for transportation, money for housing, and people are starting to talk about the price of gas, of course, always. Money for education is always an important issue. And just in the smaller towns, just making sure that we're getting our fair share, because it's really easy for us to be forgotten.
Yeah. So when we talk about gas, and also I'm hearing, heating fuel is, and I'm experiencing it myself, is going through the roof. What are some things that you're working on in this budget to help people pay for high heating fuel costs?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, low income heating assistance is always something that I try to work on. And in a supplemental budget we did last week, we were able to get $5 million included to try to up that fund and make sure that as the prices go up, that people most in need are able to access the money that they need to try to keep their budgets going as best as possible at the home level.
So that would be $5 million in addition to what currently has been in that budget. Wow, that's good to hear. And unfortunately, that's going to continue, I would think, to be a huge need. So infrastructure you're working on. What other basic services such as heating fuel assistance are some of the things that are priorities for you, and are things that you think, what are we going to see in the budget, or at least as it comes out of the House? Yeah,
when we talk about education, obviously we prioritize funding for local schools K through 12, but we also are making sure that now childcare has emerged as an important issue. A lot of people always knew it was an important issue, but I think it's becoming a more mainstream important issue as people, again, as the nature of work changed, and then changed to some in person, some virtual. So trying to make sure that people are able to afford that. Higher education remains something that's really important, making sure people are able to go to college without incurring large amounts of unnecessary debt, and have the opportunity to break through. And then in the smaller towns, we're always talking about the need for almost a true up, that the costs of the buildings, the costs of the teachers remain constant, but the number of students isn't the same as in the bigger cities. And so the amount of funding we get under the formula traditionally is a little less. And so trying to make sure that there's like a sparsity aid amount is important. And then the regional school transportation, making sure that there's adequate reimbursement for that. Because I mean, in a district like Central Berkshire, you're talking about 8 communities, one of the biggest districts in the state, coming from as far as Beckett and Cummington to Dalton. And you know, the small towns just don't have the money. They don't have the households to make that up on their own.
Yeah. And if I guess if there's not the money for these large geographic, but say small population school districts, then kids are going to have to be bused incredibly long amounts of time in the morning, and then the end of the day. And plus, I think, you know, you just lose something when you're not able to kind of go to school near where you live and things like that.
Yeah, it's true. And some of the smaller towns have had trouble keeping the local elementary schools open, and several of them have closed in the past 10 years. And sometimes it's devastating to a community, even if it's just in terms of like attitude. But nobody wants 6-7-year-olds riding on a bus for an hour. That's just not productive.
So one thing I wanted to ask you about is what goes calling many different things the opioid and overdose related deaths epidemic crisis. What's going on in that area in regards to the budget for additional services, whether for harm reduction, whether for treatment? What's going on there?
Yeah, so that's another area that over the pandemic, I think actually some of the gains that were made before 2020 were lost. And I think there's been an increase in use and it's something that hits rural communities especially hard, because when you're isolated, when you're not able to access some of the services that maybe people in recovery need, it makes it that much more difficult to stay away from those things. And so something I've always been a champion for has been opioid task forces that work with the sheriffs and the DA's offices in both Franklin, Hampshire, and Berkshire counties. And so Franklin County was one of the first to come up with this model, and their model has actually served as an example, I think, for a lot of the state. And I've always had the honor of being the lead sponsor of that funding, and then seeing their success generated a lot of buzz in Berkshire County. And I've worked with Sheriff Bowler and now the DA to make sure that we're not left behind. And so I've been able to get them funding the last couple of years. And I think they're asking for just a little more, not much more, maybe 25% more than normal. They point to, again, good work that they do, the helpful services they provide, the educational services, and the fact that a small investment, is going to save a because when you're keeping people where they need to be when you're talking about substance misuse.
Yeah, and I guess also, if people think, well, this isn't affecting them, it is. They just may not know that they know someone who is at risk, and we all need to, I guess, band together and take care of each other, because it's just a terrible disease, and it affects all of us. Whether we're aware that it's affecting us or not, we will be, unfortunately, at some point aware of the devastating impact of the disease. One of the other things that we were communicating before the show you mentioned was renewable energy. What are you doing in that area?
So this term, I'm actually the vice chair of the Committee on Telecommunications, Utilities, and Energy, which is something I had always asked to be on, and finally in a 6th term they gave it to me, which is kind of interesting. So the biggest thing we've been doing. Yeah, exactly. They didn't know I was leaving either. So. But one of the big things we've been working on the House side has actually been a bill on offshore wind energy. And so we passed that, I think, 2 or 3 weeks ago as we sit here today in mid-March. And we're poised to be the first and probably the most productive offshore wind facility as a state in the entire country. And so it's something that the speaker has prioritized. It's something I know the president is prioritizing. And we were granted one of the first federal licenses in Massachusetts to do this. And so now the focus becomes making sure that we have the job training and the educational materials ready, because this has the ability, the potential to unleash like 10,000 jobs across Massachusetts. Really? Yeah, and that includes Western Massachusetts. I know we don't live on the coast, but the ability to get the training at schools like BCC and GCC and STIC, and to then take this training in electrical fields, because when you put, not only do you have to build these wind turbines off the coast, you have to make sure that there's all the lines that need to be run, and that there's the battery storage and all these things that are being developed to make sure that this becomes a really renewable and sustainable way of making energy, and trying to get to that energy independence. And we did this right before everything that's been happening now in Ukraine, which I think has just added to that importance of, we don't want to rely on anybody. We don't want to rely on someone for something that's dirty and something that's not sustainable. We want to make sure that we're building jobs in Massachusetts, and that those jobs are going to last, and then that our energy needs are going to be met from within as much as possible is important. And it's good for the environment, it's good for the air, it's good for things. Yeah.
So what's the downside of this? Because as people are listening, they're going to say, yeah, this sounds too good to be true. I mean, what's the downside? It's going to take a little bit of time, maybe a few years, to get things where we would want them to be. It's going to create jobs. It's going to, make energy more affordable to us here in Massachusetts.
Yeah, the downside is generally that the pace moves much slower than it should have been. These are things that as a country and as a world, really, we should have been doing 20, 30 years ago.
Yeah. And
that it's never enough. So when you're offering funding and credit for one type of a good technology, it means there's others that are maybe being left behind. And that's so far the only negative I've heard is we want to make sure we don't forget about solar. We want to make sure we don't forget about geothermal, things like that. We want to make sure we're trying to balance our portfolio time. And again, we want to be sustainable. And then it allows us in the Northeast to be leaders on something. We've always been leaders in education.
Yeah.
But in education, that, like I said, hopefully is going to lead to a lot of jobs, a lot of good paying jobs.
So what will this mean for our environment in terms of things we're currently doing to the environment that are not good, based on our current energy usage?
Sure. The less we have to use oil, the less we have to use coal, the less we have to use things like that just aren't renewable and emit more carbon than we want into the air, the better off we're going to be, because we see weather's changing. We see the effects of when air is dirty. We know what that does. When water is unclean, we know what that does. So anything we can do to prevent fossil fuels from being burned and emitting dirty stuff into the air, for lack of a better word, dirty stuff is bad. And trying to prevent that, I think is extremely important. And in Massachusetts, a problem becomes our small geography. And so it's not realistic to do some things that they can do in California or in Wyoming. But here on the coast, I think taking advantage of what we have to offer that is unique is really important. And so I'm glad to see we're doing something.
Yeah. Yeah. And I guess too, when we talk about how, we want to leave things for our kids and their kids, it seems to me, based on what you're saying, this is one of those things. That
they say leave things better than when you got there. We should be doing that as a society, really.
So how much will when we're talking about the state budget, and looks like the feds have been giving us a good amount of funding, so we're in pretty good shape. But how much does what you're doing now in Boston, working on that budget, how much does that affect the typical person out here, say in Berkshire County, when there's sufficient funding or when there isn't? I guess I just want to kind of relate it to people, what they can expect in terms of tax increases or service cuts or enhancements. You were talking about infrastructure and things like that. So just tell us a little bit about how what you're doing there in Boston affects us here in our neighborhoods.
Yeah. So every time you drive, it affects you. Every time your kid goes to school, it affects you. And many people, whether you went to UMass for college, it affected me, or whether you happen to be in need of many services that are provided by the state or by the federal government, it affects us every single day. I mean, the traffic light is something the government has a hand in. You know, that's the best of government is we pool our resources together, we pool our ideas together, and we come up with things that are hopefully helpful and useful to the great majority. And so when the state is in a good financial position, which it is right now, it means that, yeah, you shouldn't expect, you shouldn't have to worry about unexpected revenue changes, fees going up, anything like that. And at the same time, you shouldn't have to worry about services that you might rely on not being there for you in a time of need. And I'm going to say something again about the pandemic, because as lessons we learned are extremely important. When COVID hit, there was a lot of people that didn't realize how close they were to the edge of a financial catastrophe. And thankfully, the federal and state government really sprang into action to make sure that people who, through no fault of their own, were finding themselves unemployed, were able to get through to meet those challenges is extremely important. So when we're in a good financial picture, that is extremely important for today and as we look to the future, because money we're getting from Washington isn't going to keep happening, and we need to be ready for whatever the next crisis is.
Yeah, and unfortunately, there will be another one. But you know, Paul, it's always good to touch base with you. And best of luck for your Senate campaign. I hope that you'll continue to be able to serve us here in Berkshire County. You have done very well for the last 10 years serving us, and I hope that continues. And keep up the good work. And thank you very much. Thank you again for that, you know, for everything you're doing for advocacy, for not only heating fuel assistance, but everything else. And to those who have joined us today, thanks so much, and be well and be safe. Bye now.